Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. So if you've even just glanced at the headlines lately, you know that today's news cycle is a chaotic, non-stop barrage of information. I mean, it's a lot. Honestly, it can be totally overwhelming. But, well, that's exactly why we're here today. My goal is to take that massive flood of global updates and transform it into a structured, easily digestible snapshot. We're going to map out exactly what's happening around the world right now and connect the dots so you can walk away with a crystal clear understanding of the day's major events.
But before we get into the weeds, I just want you to pause and think about the sheer speed of history we're living through right now. In literally a single day, our attention is constantly yanked between the absolute extremes of the human experience. We pivot from devastating war zones to extreme weather anomalies to bizarre political scandals and right over to pop culture, all in the blink of an eye. How do we even begin to process all that? Well, the best way to handle that kind of complexity is through structure.
So to keep things sane, we're going to navigate all this through 4 neat thematic chapters today. 1. Global conflicts and tensions. 2. Health and climate crises. 3. Politics, media, and society. And 4. Culture and human interest.
Okay, let's dive right into Chapter 1, Global Conflicts and Tensions, or as we can think of it, the high-stakes board.
All right, looking at the Middle East, things are moving incredibly fast, and this timeline really shows the rapid escalations. At 14:15 in the afternoon, Israeli bombing brought massive devastation across Lebanon, with an airstrike targeting a senior Hezbollah commander. Now, this is significant because it marked the first hit on Beirut's suburbs since the April ceasefire. Meanwhile, the U.S. stated it attacked an Iranian-flagged ship. But then, incredibly, just 50 hours after announcing a military operation called Project Freedom meant to guide ships through the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump actually suspended the plan. And looking at diplomatic movements today, China is stepping in. They're calling for the strait to be reopened as soon as possible, as China's Wang Yi holds talks with Iran's foreign minister on his very first trip to Beijing since the war began.
Now, you might be wondering, so what? Why does a standoff in the Strait of Hormuz thousands of miles away actually matter to your daily life? Well, reports of a potential deal to end the U.S.-Iran escalation have suddenly raised hopes globally. And as a direct result of just that hope, global oil prices have dropped and stock markets are rising. It's a brilliant illustration of how fragile diplomatic relations, like a Gulf ceasefire hanging in jeopardy, have immediate, tangible impacts on the global economy and ultimately your own wallet.
Shifting gears to the ongoing realities between Ukraine and Russia, we are seeing a truly devastating human toll. Ukraine recently proposed a unilateral ceasefire. Russia has spurned that proposal and proceeded to attack a kindergarten. The human cost on the ground here is immense. In the frontline city of Oleshki, civilians are trapped. They've been completely cut off from fresh food or medicine for months, facing what is quite literally being called a road of death. Yet right alongside this human tragedy, the very nature of warfare itself is shifting. Ukraine's president noted that territory is now being captured using just robots and drones. We are seeing a profound, real-time leap into the future of unmanned warfare.
All right, moving on to Chapter 2, Health and Climate Crises. Let's take a look at nature's unpredictability. You've probably seen those really frightening headlines recently about a viral outbreak at sea. So let's actually break down the science here. What we're dealing with on this cruise ship is the hantavirus, specifically the Andes strain. Now, this is a severe virus, and while hantaviruses in general are pretty well known, what makes this specific strain so notable is that it can, in very rare cases, actually be passed directly from person to person.
Tracing how this played out reveals a super stressful logistical nightmare. It all started with an initial outbreak, and passengers were informed of the first death on board on April 12th. Naturally, this triggered an urgent, high-stakes response. The UK's Foreign Office and other agencies worked frantically to evacuate British, German, and Dutch nationals while the ship was just off the coast of Cape Verde. Now, the virus-hit ship has departed and is expected to arrive in the Canary Islands in 3 days, which is tense, considering the island's president initially stated he didn't even want the ship to dock there. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is the stark contrast in how extreme environmental events are triggered. On the left, you've got the mechanics of your typical seismic tsunami. These are driven by underwater earthquakes. But on the right, we are looking at the massive Alaska megatsunami. This was literally the second largest ever recorded, and the biggest takeaway? New research indicates this massive wave wasn't from an earthquake at all. It's being driven by climate change and rapid glacier melt. That significantly increases the risk of these giant waves happening again in the future.
And you know, it's not just these massive, historic waves we have to worry about. Extreme, sudden weather events are striking globally.
Just recently, on May 4th, heavy rains in West Java, Indonesia, caused a river to violently overflow its banks. It completely destroyed a glamping facility in Bogor in mere moments. It's just a really stark reminder of our total vulnerability to nature's sudden, unpredictable shifts.
Which brings us to Section 3, Politics, Media, and Society. Let's look at some shifting landscapes.
I want to anchor this segment on one specific year, 1980. That was the year media mogul Ted Turner launched the cable news network, much better known to us as CNN. Ted Turner recently passed away at the age of 87, and it is basically impossible to overstate his impact. The man absolutely pioneered the modern 24-hour news culture. Without that 1980 launch, the rapid-fire, always-on global news consumption that we are analyzing today simply wouldn't exist in the same way.
And the news that flows through those 24-hour channels covers a huge spectrum of societal shifts and justice proceedings. In the U.S. Midwest, staunch Trump ally Vivek Ramaswamy just won the Republican nomination for Ohio governor in a closely watched primary. Over in Europe, German prosecutors launched a targeted crackdown, with police raiding neo-Nazi criminal youth groups across 12 different states, mainly in the East and South. And back in the U.S., justice was handed down in a deeply tragic 2022 case. A former FedEx driver was sentenced to death for kidnapping and killing 7-year-old Athena Strand in Texas. During the trial, her uncle heartbreakingly noted that her killing took a piece of every single person who loved her.
Now, to pivot to something entirely different, but equally indicative of human behavior, we have this wildly bizarre story out of France. A French academic has actually been suspended by his university after an investigation found he literally dreamed up a fake academic prize and then, you guessed it, went on to award that very prize to himself. It's a touch of absolute absurdity in the academic world, but hey, it certainly keeps our societal landscape interesting.
Okay, let's take a collective breath. Section 4, Culture and Human Interest. Time for the lighter side.
Fashion is super fascinating because it functions on the global stage in vastly different ways. On one hand, we have the ultimate pinnacle of extravagant expression. The newly announced 2026 Met Gala theme is costume art, exploring fashion strictly as an embodied art form. But then, fashion is also heavily utilized for calculated political messaging. Take North Korea, for instance. Analysts are closely watching Kim Joo-ai right now. Her evolving outfits and public appearances are widely considered significant, deliberate signs that she is actively being groomed as the country's next leader. And we are going to wrap up our thematic summaries today with a story of pure resilience and care that we all probably need right now. Over in Kenya, an orphaned baby hippo, who has been affectionately named Bumpy, was found at a lake tragically clinging to its lifeless mother. But in a really heartwarming turn of events, Bumpy has been rescued and will now be hand-reared by dedicated keepers at a local sanctuary. It's exactly the kind of emotional relief we often need when we're surveying the globe.
So that brings us to our final thought. Today, we literally just traveled from military standoffs in the Strait of Hormuz to an Alaskan mega tsunami, down to a fake academic prize in France, and finally to a baby hippo in Kenya. It leaves us with a pretty profound question. In a 24-hour news cycle pioneered by figures like Ted Turner, how do we possibly balance processing geopolitical wars right alongside orphaned hippos in a single day? I hope this explainer has helped you build a structure to do exactly that. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Keep questioning those headlines, and I'll see you next time.